One of the most famous novels in the canon of American literature appeared in 1868. It was written by Louisa May Alcott and was called Little Women. Most of us have probably read this charming story of four sisters growing up: Meg, Beth, Jo, and Amy. In one touching scene, Jo, the tomboy, falls in love with Friedrich, a poor German immigrant who in his homeland was once a famous professor, but who is now reduced to giving a few language lessons in order to make ends meet. When he learns of Jo's love for him, poor Friedrich protests, saying, "But I have nothing to give you. My hands are empty." With that, Jo entwines her own hands in his and says, "Not empty now." Often we feel we have nothing to give. We stand with empty hands. Yet it is precisely at the times when our hands are empty that God can put his hands into ours. Not empty now. Rich people were coming to the temple, calculating how much they could afford to give without hurting their own finances. Then comes a poor widow with 2 pennies to her name. Without thinking, without calculating, without worrying what she would do, she gives both of those pennies, all she had. This is a story not so much about almsgiving as about not being afraid of empty hands. This poor widow was able to do what that rich young man of several weeks ago was unable to do. She was able to empty herself in order to be filled with God. All the other people calculated how much they could afford to give. Had she sat down to calculate, she would have seen that she couldn't afford to give anything at all, and she would have been exempt from having to give anything. But she did not calculate. She emptied herself. This is not a story about giving money. This is a story about giving of ourselves. A story about standing unafraid with empty hands. All of us are afraid of standing with empty hands. Empty hands terrify us. We feel so unprotected, so naked, so vulnerable. When I was a child, I took karate lessons. Now, karate is one of those beautiful forms of martial arts which comes to us from the rich treasury of the East. What I learned was that the word karate comes from 2 words, kara and te, which means empty hands. Because in karate, you stand there with empty hands, unafraid. I would not like to meet a karate expert in a dark alley, even if I were armed, because empty hands are very powerful. It is when we stand with empty hands that we can truly receive. And it is when we stand with empty hands that we can truly give. The great Curé of Ars, Saint Jean-Marie Vianney, used to say, "I have been privileged to give great gifts from my empty hands." It is when we have emptied ourselves that we can truly be filled with God. It is significant that St. Mark gives us the story of this widow just before he tells of Jesus speaking of the last things, just before the narration of the Last Supper and the Passion. It was at that moment that Christ emptied himself entirely, hung naked between heaven and earth, stretching out his empty hands in order that we might be filled with God. This widow is given to us as a foreshadowing of this self-emptying which reached its culmination in the crucifixion of the Christ. As a result of her emptying, as a result of her empty hands, this poor widow is able to stand among the ranks of all those other great people from the beginning of time who have not been afraid to empty themselves and stand with empty hands. With Abraham, with Mary, and with Christ himself. Let us then not be afraid to empty ourselves, to go through life hand in hand with God. Let us not be afraid to stand emptied alongside this poor widow, alongside the crucified naked Christ. And at the end of life, as we stand before the throne of God, let us not come before God with hands that are full, boasting of the things we have done, saying, "Look, God, at all these things I have done for you. Now see what you owe me." Let us rather stand as this poor widow, with empty hands, humble, emptied of all. And may we then see God lovingly entwine his hand in ours and hear him whisper, "Not empty now."